Hello everyone, welcome to A Lake, and you might be able to see it on camera. I have a bit of a tan/burn line here. I went to the beach the other day and got burned, but here I am. Anyway, today I'm going to be talking about intuition and sensing and the differences between these two things in a way that reflects more of Jung's kind of approach to these two things. Now, intuition and sensing are topics that are commonly talked about in MBTI because it's the only dichotomy in the MBTI dichotomy that has a significant statistical difference between how common the two differences are. So, for example, it's estimated that around 70% of the world is sensing types and around 30% of the world is intuitive types. Now, we don't know this for sure, but that's what's estimated and that's what the statistics tend to show. And I want to talk about intuition and sensing and maybe see if we can get rid of some of the biases associated with each of these things. Let's get into it. So, to start off, intuition and sensing are what Jung referred to as irrational functions, as in not rational. And this is because they are not associated with any decision-making process or value-based judgments like the rational functions, thinking and feeling, are. This essentially means that intuition and sensing are more so focused on kind of interfacing with the world and collecting information than they are with making decisions about the information that has been collected. If we look at the common definitions for intuition and sensing, we can see that the differences are pretty clear. Sensing types are known as being concrete, down-to-earth, and realistic, while intuitive types tend to be abstract, in their head, and they like to look at the themes of things. Now, this goes way deeper than people tend to think of it as going. So sensing types, yes, they are down-to-earth and realistic, but you have to ask, why are they like that? Why do they tend to interact with the world in that way? It's because sensing as a perceiving function is one that tries to interface and interact with the world in a way that is truly reflective of what is being perceived. They're not trying to make some sort of abstract interpretation of the world. They want to deal with information for what it is, and this is extremely valuable, and people tend to undervalue this in the MBTI and typology community. Now, intuitive types, on the other hand, don't like to interact with the world for what is directly there. They're often looking for some sort of underlying theme or concept that can be interpreted and internalized within them. Now, the important thing to remember about these is that they are coming at the expense of the other, which is to say that the intuitive type is going to be missing the grounded realistic details, the face value of the thing that they're interacting with, while the sensing types will often be missing the underlying themes and kind of archetypes of the thing that they are perceiving. It's important to remember that this is going to cause these types to have differences in how they communicate with each other and how they interact with the world overall. The sensing types are not going to be paying attention to those themes, and therefore they might get frustrated when someone tries to bring up some sort of abstract concept that is related to the thing that they're trying to interact with at that face realistic value. The intuitive type, on the other hand, might get frustrated because the sensing type is not going to want to discuss those types of themes, and they're not going to want to pay attention to the things that the intuitive type likes. The intuitive type is going to want to talk about what's going to unfold over time, what's going to happen, what are these underlying themes, what's the moral of the story, those types of things. And it's going to be frustrating if a sensing type tries to bring up these realistic details, like, no, this is what's happening. This is, look at the event that we are viewing right now. You're trying to spin a story out of something that isn't there. You're just trying to come up with something. And that's going to be frustrating for the sensing types, because in reality, there's going to be many times where an intuitive type will just spin a story or a process from an event when there's nothing actually there. And this is frustrating for the sensing types. For example, it's very easy for intuitives to want to jump to conclusions when they're viewing or perceiving something. If there's missing pieces of the puzzle in the sensory picture, they're going to try and fill those in and come to a conclusion. Whereas the sensory type instead wants to build the sensory puzzle. They want to build it up and then come to a complete picture that is made of realistic details. Say an intuitive type and a sensing type are watching the news and some story comes on about a politician. The intuitive might jump to some conclusion. Well, I bet he's doing this, or I bet he's doing that. You know, I've got reasons to believe that he's some bad person. And the sensing type might say, well, what reasons do you have to believe this? Do you have any proof? Is there any realistic evidence that this is going on? And the intuitive type will say, no, I mean, just look at his character, look at his person. I can kind of perceive these things. And, you know, in some cases, either could be right, both could be wrong. But the point is that both are going to be approaching those types of situations from opposing ends of the perceiving axis. I like to conceptualize it like this. Think of intuition and sensing as an upside-down pyramid. So essentially, the intuitive types are going to start at that wide top of the upside-down pyramid. They're going to start up here where everything is abstract, there's many different interpretations, it's not focused on detail, and then with enough time, if you give them time, they will eventually work their way down to the details, the fine pointed tip of the upside-down pyramid. Now, sensing types, on the other hand, prefer to start with that fine-pointed tip, the realistic details of the thing that they're interacting with. And if you give them enough time, they will eventually work their way up to the abstract concepts. And the difference is that it can be an issue for these types to communicate if they don't give the other type enough time to get to that middle ground of that pyramid. Types need to find ways to process that information and have time to process that information, or else they're going to give their immediate judgments and perceptions without really having time to come to the middle. This is going to be most polarizingly noticeable in types that have intuitive and sensing dominant functions, such as the ENTP or the ISTJ. These types of types that lead with sensing and intuition, when they try to interact with each other, they're going to be missing each other in communication a lot because they're not going to be taking that time to really allow the other person to get to where they are in conversation or to kind of catch up with what's being said. The extroverted intuitive ENTP, for example, is going to be hopping between abstract concepts before the ISTJ is going to even be finishing their first realistic idea that they want to refine and get down to the point of. And this is extremely confusing and annoying for both of these types because they both want to present what it is that they're perceiving and thinking, and they're unable to effectively do this with someone if they don't know how to communicate with that type of person. So it's important for sensing and intuitive types to realize the importance of allowing someone of that different preference to get to the point where you are in communication. I want to briefly touch on the idea of intuitive bias, and in the MBTI and typology community, this has been a big problem. The idea that intuitive types are somehow smarter or better than sensing types because they are slightly more rare, according to the statistics. This is, of course, not true. And a lot of people don't realize that intuitive types tend to have their own weaknesses that are not presented as much in the typology community. Sensing types have strengths that are not presented much in the typology community. For example, if we look at someone like Michael Jackson, we can see that he is very likely an SFP, an extroverted sensing type. And this is something that you're not going to see an intuitive be able to do. Michael Jackson was somebody who changed the world because he was able to directly interact with it. And this is something that you don't see with the intuitives, who often can get stuck in some sort of observation paralysis at times. They hate to interact with things for what they directly are, and they struggle with living in the moment. People who change the world are often sensing types because they're willing to go out and actually interact with the world, compared to the intuitives, who are more often than not stuck in their own heads trying to change something conceptually. Now, this isn't to say that sensing types don't have their weaknesses as well. You often find that the intuitive types do tend to be people who like to innovate. Intuition is one of the cognitive functions associated with wanting to change what already is, while sensing types prefer to interact with or preserve what already is. So intuitive types tend to be the ones who are inventors or people who come up with new ways of doing things. And you might have noticed that I said that both intuitives and sensing types can change the world, and this is true. The difference is that intuitive and sensing types are going to change the world in their own unique way. I don't think an intuitive type could do what Michael Jackson did easily. I don't think a sensing type could do what Leonardo da Vinci did easily. The difference is in how these people are going to be interacting with the world. What are their goals? What are their values? What is it that they can bring to the table? And that's the important part of recognizing the strengths of being a sensing type versus the strengths of being an intuitive type. Because each can do amazing things in the world. Michael Jackson is going to be remembered for the rest of history, essentially, and he was very, very likely a sensing type. And that's something that's really important to remember, is just because you're a sensing type or an intuitive type doesn't mean you're inherently better than someone of the other preference. All right, everybody, I hope you've enjoyed this discussion on intuition and sensing, the differences between them, and the idea of intuitive bias. In my opinion, intuitive bias has been a problem in the typology community for a long time now, and it's important that if we want to see this community grow, we want to see the MBTI typology community grow, that we learn to better talk about the sensing types and be more accepting to them into the community. Because if they truly do make up a majority of the world, then it's important to be accepting of them and show that those types have strengths if we want to see these communities grow. I would like to remind everybody that this channel does have a new affiliate partner, Bones Coffee, which is a coffee company that I've been personally buying from for more than 2 years. So if you'd like to support this channel by buying some coffee, check out the link in the description box below. Other than that, I would like to remind everybody that I do have typing sessions available at my website, asurapsych.com, if you're interested in working with me to find out what your personality type is and what that means for you. This has been Asura at Asura Psych. Have a good one.